Good afternoon, and welcome to the second webinar of our webinar series on expanding the scope of research in planetary health in Europe. I am Jaana Halonen, Research Program Director from Finnish Institute for Health and Welfare, THL, and I'm hosting this session with Professor Alan Dangour. He's Professor in Food and Nutrition for Global Health and also Director of the Centre on Climate Change and Planetary Health at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. This initiative of the series of webinars on planetary health is part of the Severo Ochoa strategic program of ISGlobal and the result of a strong collaboration between THL, London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and ISGlobal. And from ISGlobal, our collaborator is colleague Josep Maria Anto, research professor at ISGlobal and professor of medicine at Universitat Pompeu Fabra. The idea for this webinar series is rooted in the conference Europe that Protects, Safeguarding Our Health, Safeguarding Our Planet, that was held in Helsinki in 2019, when Finland held presidency of the European Union. In that conference, researchers, policymakers, and regulators presented and discussed issues related to planetary health and how to deploy this approach in Europe. Last week, we started a webinar series with an overview on the planetary health concept, and we heard that we should move beyond observational science to make changes. The recording of that event can be found online. Today, we continue with food systems, sustainability, and health. The three remaining webinars are entitled Energy Decarbonization, Health and Equity, Promoting Health Through Sustainable Urban Development, and Catalyzing Demand for Planetary Health in Europe. But now I will let Alan introduce today's program.
Thank you very much, Jaana, and thank you to everybody for joining. It's fantastic to see such a great turnout for today, the second webinar in this series. I'm absolutely delighted to be co-organizing this series with Jaana and Josep Anto. I think it's a really exciting activity and very pleased to be part of it. So today we're going to focus on a really important topic, the topic of food systems, their sustainability and their health. And we've got a fantastic lineup of speakers for you today. So if I could have the next slide. We've got 2 hours today, and what we're going to do is we've got 6 speakers that we're going to have to cover a range of different topics. And there's also going to be 2 opportunities for you to contribute to our discussions. We've got 2 panel discussions, which is really going to be an opportunity for you to ask questions. So please do use the Q&A function to ask your questions. On the bottom there on Zoom, you'll see a Q&A function. Ask your question in there, and you can upvote a question if you really like a question that's there and you want it to be asked to the panel, then please do. So we're going to start off today with a talk by Minna Kaljonen, who's going to talk about planetary health, diets, and just food system transition. So everyone wants to transition to healthier and more sustainable diets, and how do you do that justly? And then we've got a series of slightly shorter talks, really punchy research talks. Sara Gonzalez Garcia from the University of Santiago de Compostela is going to talk about the environmental footprints of Spanish foods, Spanish diets. Pauline Schielbeek from the London School is going to talk about trade. Hanna Tuomisto from the University of Helsinki is going to talk about innovations in food systems, such as cell-cultured foods. Brian Cook from the University of Oxford is going to talk about how we get people to change their behaviors. Then we're going to have a discussion, a Q&A, an opportunity for you to ask any of those first 5 speakers a burning question that you're wanting to ask forever. And then in the second after that, we're going to have a couple of policy talks. First of all, Dora from the European Commission is going to talk about the European Farm to Fork strategy, and we're very grateful to have her with us. And then not on this screen, but we are very fortunate today to have Anna Lahti with us, Professor Anna Lahti, who is the most recent Director of Nutrition for the Food and Agriculture Organization, so a major person in global nutrition, and she'll be giving us some of her perspectives as well. And then again at the end, there'll be hopefully 15 to 20 minutes for us for you to ask your questions and to contribute to the discussion. So hopefully it'll be a really exciting session, lots of opportunity for you to engage as well. And please do keep those questions coming through on the Q&A function. So I think that's it. I think, oh yes, technical notes. So number one, the webinar is being recorded. For technical reasons, microphones are deactivated, the chat is deactivated, and the raise hand function will not be attended. So please submit your questions, as I've said, through the Q&A, and if it's to the whole panel, say it's to the whole panel. If it's to a specific person, you can direct it to them as well. And I think there's also an upvoting system on that Q&A, so please do use that if there's a particular question you want to see asked. All right, I think that's it. Fantastic. Janne, do I introduce Minna now? I think I do. It's my great pleasure, therefore, to introduce Minna Kaljonen. Thank you very much, Minna. I'm going to leave it to you to share your screen and to give your presentation. Thank you very much indeed.
Alan and Jana for the introduction. I'm really glad that you are with me with my Slack here. A bit.
Can you put them on full screen, Minna?
I am trying to, but it somehow says that my connection is now. Is it now better?
Perfect. Thank you.
Very good. So let me first introduce myself. So I'm Minna Kaljonen and I come from Finnish Institute from Finland. I work there as a research professor on sustainability transformations, and most of my research has really concentrated on a food system transition. Today I will talk a bit about what does justice mean in terms of food system transition, and when we are thinking about this sustainable and planetary healthy diets. It's a big topic, it's a huge topic, but I wish to offer you some hints of or routes to think about it, also with respect to politics and research, and also what kind of research questions are important when we talk about just transition. This talk originates from a current research project that I'm leading called Just Food, where we try to really address the inequalities on our way to more sustainable and healthy food systems, and bring this food system view on it, and think about the justice questions that arise there in the meantime. But to start with, I want to again highlight and underline how the climate change as a whole is a systemic challenge, and it is that also for a food system. And this has been underlined with the series of studies, and also with the IPCC with its recent, already a couple of years back, the report on the land use changes. And there the key message was really that if we want to work with the food security, we need to take care of the more kind of the farming methods, the more sustainable and resource efficient farming, what happens in the field, that we do not waste the land but take care of it in the meantime. So a lot has to be carried out there. We also need to minimize the food waste so that nothing gets lost in food system. This means different things in different parts of the world, and always something will be wasted, but to make wise use of it. And then as a third one, the topic of today is the sustainable and healthy diets, that we need to look at the diets critically as well, also from the perspective of environment and not only health. This is the famous figure from the Eat Lancet report on the planetary healthy diet, where they developed this kind of a reference diet for addressing both the health, or the human health and the planetary health aspects, and really saying the same message that actually, or really saying this message that there are shifts to be carried out in our diets, but this again also means different things in different parts of the world. But when looking at the general picture or the average picture, really the blue and the green ones here are where the changes should take place if we want to achieve a planetary health perspective, so that we take both care of the human health and the planetary health, meaning that the consumption of the red meat need to decrease, and also meaning that, for example, our use of legumes in our diet needs to be increased. And this, I would say, is particularly relevant for the Western world, for the global north, so to say. For the global south and for the developing countries and others, there might be different issues at stake. This is going back to the picture, actually, that the blue and green ones, they are really highlighting the changes for production that we should have. What does it mean for the food production if our diet, if our consumption is to change? So it really means a series of changes in all food chain activities and food system activities in all the chain. We cannot look at them separately anymore, simply cannot. And actually what is important, that what is in the between of the different activities. Here is the common figure of the food chain. What are the really different activities there, starting from inputs to primary production, processing, retail, restaurant and food services, and food consumption. And of course, then also the material, including the waste circles across the different activities. But here we have also highlighted the kind of that the food system should provide outcomes as well, meaning food security and good nutrition. It should provide livelihoods and environmental and animal welfare. And when we think about the food system activities, we all the time need to kind of a balance between these outcomes. They are all equally important. And the question is how to balance between these now, as our also when thinking about the dietary changes. So it addresses a new challenge for that as well. So then about the justice, what does it really mean in this? If we are to change our behaviors and food system functioning towards the more sustainability, and think about also the transition needed for the sake of the diets. So the key thing is really that if this is such a big transition, it means that there will be winners and losers always in a societal change. And it's a fact that should be acknowledged. And we should learn more about those kind of impacts that the transition that we are seeking for in terms of planetary health. What does it really mean for the different social groups, for the different production sectors, for the different regions, for the different countries, and really go for it. And this is really a challenge and a call for research, that we need the detailed knowledge on how does this play out in different countries and in different conditions. And then for the policy, it means that also that these can be alleviated and a better society. And the thinking in this. Sorry. My computer is about to restart, but it will do that after my presentation. So sorry about the label there. But anyhow, it is an emerging political agenda, this just transition, and it has been mainly talked and discussed in terms of energy systems and turning that into fossil-free. And a lot of things are happening there, and this has been a political topic raised originally by the labor unions, where they have been kind of concerned about the employment and economy effects of the transition to sustainable energy. And there are these commissions, for example, Canada was one of the first, and now in Scotland, the Finnish government also has this just transition in the government program, and also in the EU Green Deal and the Farm to Fork strategy, somewhat also they have this emphasis on in thinking about the justice questions and equalities in equity in the transition. It's also raising research interest within the sustainability transition research, where originally it has been more concerned about how do we come about, how do we proceed with the changes with innovations and so forth in turning into more sustainable societies. But now in this field of research, also this consideration that we need to take into account the social justice issues has raised more interest. It has a strong kind of footage in environmental philosophy and in environmental and food justice literature. And really there is a long tradition of justice and ethical reasoning in philosophy. And I now want to share you some concepts that are helpful in thinking about the just transition, how to take into account the justice when we are about to change our food system functioning. So in a classical philosophical reasoning, there has been this division between different justices. And there is this distributive justice, which is concerned about how do the harms and benefits distribute across the society between the different groups, be they in the socioeconomic groups of people or the production sectors and regions, but also in terms of kind of environmental and animal welfare that we take into account. If we aim for low carbon society, that we take into account the biodiversity as well and the water use and stuff like that. And this is really important in terms of a food system transition. The philosophical reasoning also says that it's not enough that we understand how do the harms and benefits distribute, but we should also recognize what is the kind of recognize and respect the plurality of values in our societies. And this is especially true with respect to vulnerable and marginalized groups who do not have necessarily kind of ways and means to attract and get to the political decision making, to really understand the conditions where the people come from. For example, here, the views of the farmers who are about to change their practices. So we need to understand what the farming means for them, how they know their land and so forth, to give a recognition to that. And the third one is really this kind of comes to the societal decision making. It's a procedural justice, that the procedures in the society that we have for decision making, that they should provide equal opportunities for different groups to participate in decision making. This is the very principle of democracy, I would say. But this can be taking place in different forms. And then with respect to just transition, when we are aiming for change, really this restorative justice, when, for example, that what kind of caused harms should be compensated and kind of alleviated with some compensatory measures. So this is the kind of the analytical tools that the environmental justice philosophy gives us to think about the just transition. And now some examples, if we think about that in terms of a dietary transition. So we know that already the inequalities in nutrition are already great. So if we are aiming for a change, we need to take into account, acknowledge those, and somehow acknowledge those, but then also try to tackle them in the meantime. We know that there is a global burden of malnutrition, and it's getting kind of more and more troublesome and complex. The phenomenon that there is malnutrition and or that the overweight and stunting existing at the same time, meaning that it's a very complex phenomena to deal with in terms of good nutrition and healthy eating. But then there has been carried out studies on what does it mean that this Eat Lancet reference diet, that really there are big differences between the countries in terms of their either they are high income or low income, if they can afford the diet that this Eat Lancet Commission is proposing. Meaning that actually that in the global north, the difference is not so huge in comparison to the low income countries, and for example to Africa, where also the distribution of people affording this diet is also greater. So it means that it's not a piece of cake. Also, with respect to eating meat and vegetables in Europe, we have a huge differences. Here are examples from Finland, from our how we eat in Finland, meaning that men and women eat quite differently when we look at meat and vegetables. And in Finland, almost 80% of the men eat more meat than is recommended by the nutrition guidelines. And there is also division between the urban and rural areas in this respect. When we talk about the planetary healthy diet and the change of our eating habits, it really hits the identities and cultural values. And this is what we have learned when we have worked with the Finnish school meal program in bringing in the sustainability issues there, and meaning that we really need to work with the cultural identities and questions of identity and recognize those when we touch upon people's eating. Another part of the inequalities in food system is really that the inequalities are great in food chain, in how the value and the income and economy distributes there. The food system has been described as one of hourglass, and that is in many cases true. It's also true with regards to these novel plant-based products. Like in Finland, we have a quite extensive innovative product development within the industry with regards to these, but still there is a lot to do in farming and in fields, that we get really the domestic legumes stronger, meaning that there is an imbalance in who gets the benefits from these.
1 minute, Minna.
Just quickly to make, I will come to the end. If we really want to go forward to the more sustainable food system, also from the perspective of dietary transition, we need to work with the whole food system, as I said previously. And here are, for example, an example where we have studied that what kind of means do the different food system actors propose for strengthening the Finnish legume value chain. And interestingly, the different actors in different parts of the food system, they highlight different means and policy means, so to say. The ones from the production, they really want to have the production in place. The industry goes really for the disruption by markets, and speaks for the phasing out of the regulation in many respects. And then there is this third frame, which really talks about the public steering for sustainable diets, which I think quite many of us here somehow align to, that we really need to, that healthy eating needs the public support. meaning that there are these competing frames for developing the system, meaning that we need to take those all into account and consider them as a whole, and then build the kind of the policy mix that we need, and that we are able, what is kind of acceptable from the societal point of view. Again, I want to end with this, that the just food system transition requires effort in all fronts. We cannot dismiss any activity in the food system or in the chain. And it is most of all a challenge to procedural justice, because in policy making, most of our policies concentrate in each aspect at a time. But if we want to aim for more kind of a sustainable and healthy eating, which is our target, we need to have this encompassing view. And there are only very few kind of this kind of a policy initiatives that go for this holistic view. Thank you.
Thank you, Minna. And then we need to run to the second presentation. And Sara Gonzalez will now talk about environmental footprints of Spanish recommended dietary patterns. Please, Sara.
Yes. Can you see the slide?
Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. And firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to take part in this interesting webinar. I am chemical engineer, and I am senior researcher at the University of Santiago de Compostela. I hold a PhD on environmental and chemical engineering, and in the last years, I have been involved in several studies focused on determining the environmental impacts associated with current food consumption habits. For that reason, this presentation is focused on the environmental footprints of the Spanish recommended dietary patterns. Okay. Carbon dioxide concentrations are rising, mostly because of anthropogenic activities, agriculture, fossil fuel combustion, deforestation. These greenhouse gases emission involve several effects on the environment, but also direct and indirect effects on humans. However, not all of these activities contribute in the same way to greenhouse gases emissions. And in this regard, food sector, which include agricultural, fishing, and farming activities, plays a key role. But food system and the production of the foodstuffs contribute not only to climate change, but also to other impact categories. For example, to water resources scarcity. Around 70% of fresh water is destined to agricultural activities all over the world. If we pay attention, for example, in the case of Spain, the amount of food waste produced per person and day is equivalent to more than 130 liters. That is the same as having one bath. For example, the production of the Spanish daily food consumption habits per person and day involves more than 5,000 liters of water. That is, it is the same as having per person and day 53 5-minute showers. But not all the foodstuffs contribute in the same way to this impact category. For that reason, we can say that the relationship between diet, food system, and environmental impact and nutrition is clear. Nutrition is a basic human need, and access to adequate nutrition depends on several social, political, and economic factors. Our current eating habits also have an effect not only on health and well-being, but also on the environmental impacts. And providing the growing global population with healthy diets from sustainable food systems is an immediate challenge. Special attention has been paid in the last year on the quantification of the environmental consequences of our current food consumption habits. And in this regard, two are the environmental indicators more extensively used, that are the carbon footprint, which estimates the equivalent carbon dioxide emissions associated to the life cycle of the food production system, and the water footprint, which estimates the volume of water required to produce the foodstuffs. In both cases, following the environmental life cycle assessment methodology. And in the case of Spain, on the goal of introducing healthy consumption habits between the Spanish population, because our current consumption habits are not healthy, 3 different balanced diets have been promoted in the country. The Mediterranean diet, which is well known all over the world, and it is extended in the Mediterranean countries and is recognized as a healthy diet. The Southern European Atlantic diet, common in Norway, Spain, and Northern Portugal, with several health benefits, as well as promoting the consumption of local and seasonal products. And finally, the NAOS strategy, from now NAOS diet, which is developed by the Spanish Ministry of Health in order to tackle the national rise in obesity rates. All of them are omnivorous diets, but the composition is different between them, being the Mediterranean diet more based on plant-based foodstuffs in comparison with the other two. At the bottom of this slide, you can see some differences, for example, in terms of the consumption of some food groups, for example, in terms of vegetables, meat, fish, and starchy products between the three diets. And we can see that, for example, in terms of vegetables, in the Mediterranean diet, the recommended frequency is around the double than, for example, in the Atlantic diet. And something similar occurs, for example, with the consumption of starchy products in the case of the Atlantic diet. So bearing in mind the recommended frequency intakes for the different food groups, we estimated the carbon footprint score for each recommended diet, and we have identified some differences. Here the results are reported per person and day, following the recommended diets, and we can see that the carbon footprint score is higher in the case of the Atlantic diet, approximately 20% higher than Mediterranean, and 15% higher than NAOS diet. The rationale behind these results is the highest consumption frequency of animal-based foodstuff in the Atlantic diet in comparison with the Mediterranean diet. In terms of water footprint, we can identify also some differences. Once again, the Atlantic diet reports the highest water footprint score. In both Atlantic diet and NAOS diet, the consumption of animal-based foodstuff is higher than in the Mediterranean one. So according to our results, the dietary patterns more dependent on animal-based products, and specifically with higher consumption of meat, report worse results in these impact categories. But we are going to position these recommended diets with others identified in the literature. So in this map, now we can see the carbon footprint scores associated with current consumption habits in different countries all over the world. For example, in the case of Spain, our current consumption habits report per person and day around 4.4 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent, which is considerably far, for example, as the current consumption habits in North America, whose carbon footprint is approximately 13 kilos of equivalent carbon dioxide. For example, in Nordic countries, it is about 5.20. But what happens with the Spanish recommendations? If we place in the map the Spanish recommendations, if people follow the Spanish recommendations, we can see that the scores, the carbon footprint score is considerably lower. It is it ranges between 2.80 and 3.60, which is in line, for example, with some vegetarian diets. The carbon footprint is about 3.20. If we compare these results with, for example, other healthy habits other healthy guidelines that we could identify in Europe, for example, the new Nordic diet that follows the Mediterranean philosophy and the Dutch guidelines, we can see that the Spanish recommendations are better from an environmental point of view in terms of carbon footprint. If we consider the water footprint, here we are only reporting green and blue water footprint. Here we can see the water footprint scores of current dietary patterns in different countries, but special attention should be paid into the system boundaries that we have considered for the estimation of these values, because in some cases, the water footprint associated to the production of the food waste is not included. But if we place the water footprint associated with the Spanish recommendations is there, we can see that the values are in line with vegetarian diets. Also, in the Spanish recommendations, there is a consumption of animal-based foodstuffs. If we compare this score with, for example, the one associated with the new Nordic diet, which is a healthy dietary pattern, we can see that the score is considerably higher than in the case of the Spanish ones. So, according to these results, what we can say? We can say that the adherence to these Spanish diets can be recommended from a healthy approach, but also from an environmental perspective. In this regard, in terms of environmental approach, we can see that the carbon footprint and the water footprint are in line with those associated with vegetarian diets. In all the cases, they are omnivorous diets. These are healthy dietary patterns based on health considerations, including in base of each food group, that is, including animal-based foodstuffs, but with some limitations. Special attention should be paid into the high potential that these dietary guidelines have in terms of local adaptation and national and regional adaptation. In some cases, they recommended the consumption of seasonal and local products. So the three can be considered win-to-win diets. And finally, and to finish, it should be interesting to promote these dietary patterns among the society. So some public campaigns should be designed in order to introduce the three diets among Europe. And I finished. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, Sarah. Thank you very much. Excellent timing. I thought that was a great talk and identifies the value of current dietary recommendations. And I particularly liked your sentence, if only people followed guidelines. I think we've got that, hopefully Brian will help us with that one a bit later on. Thank you, Sarah. That was excellent. Okay, I'm really pleased now to introduce Pauline Schielbeek, who will be talking about trade. Pauline is from our group at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Over to you, Pauline.
Right, thank you very much, Ellen. Let me share this. Yeah, is that all right?
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jana and Ellen and Joseph, for inviting me to briefly discuss some of the research in our group and some of our collaborators, of course, around Europe. So I'd like to take a few minutes to discuss a third dimension of sustainable food systems or sustainable diets. So besides the impacts on health and the impacts for the environment, different environmental components, I'd like to discuss the food system resilience of transitions to more sustainable diets, and in particular the role of international trade, or the potential role of international trade in food system resilience in this context. But this might be some pictures that you're all familiar with. It was an exhibition from now quite a number of years ago, so specific or typical shops of European families might have changed a little bit over time. But what you can see there, it's quite far from this planetary plate as was presented to you by the previous speakers. And what we see there immediately is that especially the amount of fruits and vegetables, the consumption of plant-based foods there is much higher than most of the families in the pictures in the Hungry Planet exhibition. So some transformations are certainly needed, which involves also quite a bit of behavior change. And whilst we are all working on that to see what works, and Brian will talk a little bit about that as well later on, we start to get to know more, and evidence is quite rapidly accumulating about the health effects of these moves towards predominantly plant-based diets, and also the environmental benefits of it. However, it is quite important to know where this additional supply of plant-based foods, as we would require if we were to, for example, all eat seven a day or 5 a day, or more than 400 grams a day. And unlike animal source foods, quite a number of plant-based foods, and especially if I refer to the UK, I will use the UK as an example here, are not all grown here, whereas most of our animal sourced foods are domestically produced. And so you can imagine that with climate change having an impact on global agriculture, that does have an influence on the resilience of food systems everywhere, and hence also in countries where that climate change is not felt that much, especially not in the agricultural sector, but our food systems rely on imports from other more affected climate change vulnerable countries around the world. And just like the impact of climate change on cereals, fruits and vegetables, if no further agricultural advancements, without any further agricultural advancement, we will also see negative impacts on yields of all kinds of different environmental stresses, such as reduced water availability, an increase in temperature, an increase in ozone or salinization. And you do see there at the top that an increased concentration of CO2 does make plants grow faster. But as we all know, these usually don't work in isolation, so often come with together with an increase in temperature or a reduced water availability. So it's very important to keep that in mind, and also that these impacts on plant-based foods, and especially now if we talk about fresh produce of fruit and vegetables, hence it very much matters of where we are sourcing them from. So if we look at Europe, we find something quite interesting here. This is a picture where you see the proportion of major food groups: fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts and seeds on the left-hand side, the plant-based foods, and meats, dairy and cereals on the right-hand side of each of them. And you see that plant-based foods are more imported from outside of Europe, from countries in Africa, Asia and South America. And even although I grouped them for this figure all together, and of course climate vulnerabilities might range quite substantially within these continents, of course, you see that there's quite a difference between where we source our animal sourced foods from versus the plant sourced foods. And so if we were to make that shift, that automatically, if you look at, for example, a calorie to calorie approach, that would also, if we don't change the way how we import or our strategies, that would increase our reliance on other countries. And you see here that there's not that much of a difference in the past 30 years of where we get these plant-based foods versus animal-sourced foods from. So in the UK, we've been looking at what sort of approaches can we use here to expand that fruit and vegetable supply. We could look at what we have at the moment and have more supply of what we already have. So what we produce domestically, but also what we import. Or we could look at could we produce, for example, more in the UK itself? And what sort of consequences would that have for the UK, but perhaps also for our trade partners that we are obviously doing business with? And some of them are also countries that for a large part of their GPA depend on the GDP depend on our the trade with Europe, for example. And so this picture here shows the current production of fruits and vegetables in the UK and the total supply, which includes also imports. And then if we were to go to 7 a day, which is the largest bar on the right-hand side of that graph, what we need to add to that, which is rather substantial, both in terms of domestic production and in terms of imports. And then there is another complication, and that is that our taste or our preference of different fruits and vegetables has quite changed over time. The fruit and vegetable basket that you see there on the left isn't the same as you see on the right. And this is for the UK, but probably similar patterns could be found in other countries across Europe. But we see that some of the more tropical varieties that certainly are not produced in Europe or not in the UK have gained popularity. On the top row, you see the top 18 fruit and vegetable types in the 1980s, and then at the bottom, it's approximately 25, 26 years later, where you see that crops like the banana have increased a lot in popularity, whereas cabbages and peas that are typically produced in the UK have lost some of that popularity. And that's also reflected in this map, where you see where we import our fruits and vegetables from in the 1980s and in the 2010s. The overall production in the UK has gone down as well. And if we score these countries that we are importing from in terms of climate vulnerability, you see that, and that's the current climate vulnerability status of the country, then you see that if we import, according to how we did that in the 1980s, 20% of our supply is coming from highly climate vulnerable countries, whereas that now currently has almost doubled. Just to add a note that also the proportion that we import from countries with a water scarcity problem has been increasing as well. And so I wanted to end on saying a few words about what would happen if we were to expand, for example, the domestic production in the UK. And that is also quite an interesting point in terms of biodiversity. For example, we've been talking about greenhouse gases and water, but this is some work from our colleagues at UCL, which have been looking at would it be possible to expand horticulture area in the UK, and what sort of impact would that have in biodiversity? And the paper is still forthcoming, but the conclusions are more or less that if you were to do a calorie-to-calorie approach where you replace land with livestock farming to fruits and vegetables, this would require less land, more space for rewilding, and predominantly also a positive impact on biodiversity. But of course, with the drawback of less trade with countries that perhaps would benefit very much from trading with us. And then I'll end here saying that, of course, we should keep in mind that this cuts across all kinds of traditional silos, so that you see all these trade-offs and benefits and how they impact various sectors, but hopefully will be something that we could further discuss in the discussion. And these are some of the people I work with and our university there on the picture.
Thank you very much, Pauline. That was excellent. And then we need to move on to our next speaker, who is Hanna Tuomisto, and she will talk about environmental impacts of cell-cultured foods. Please, Hanna.
Hey, hello everybody. I'm Hanna Tuomisto. I'm an associate professor in sustainable food systems at the University of Helsinki. And I'm leading the Future Sustainable Food Systems research group. And we are focusing on researching the novel food production technologies, the environmental impacts, and also the societal impacts. But today I will focus on the environmental impacts of cell-cultured foods. And I will start by introducing the concept of cellular agriculture, which means the use of cell culturing technologies for producing agricultural products. And it's divided to two different groups, so cellular products and acellular products. And these cellular products are products that consist of the cells that have been cultured, for example, cultured meat, leather, fur, wood, or offal. And these acellular products are products that are synthesized by cells like microbes or yeast or microfungus or bacteria. And examples are casein, which is milk protein, gelatin, vanillin, omega-3 fatty acid, and ovalbumin. And these cell-cultured foods are not really anything new in the sense that we have been using similar technologies for example, for producing cyanobacteria, spirulina, or mycoprotein, which is the trade name corn, which is widely available in the supermarkets in many countries. And so I will explain a little bit more about cultured meat. So cultured meat is produced by taking a small sample of cells from a livestock. They can be taken from the embryo or directly from the muscle tissue without killing the animal. And these cells are first multiplied in a nutrition medium in a bioreactor, which is like a steel tank containing the nutrients and the right temperature and other conditions that the cells require. And then when the cells have been multiplied, then they are differentiated to muscle cells, and then they start to build the muscle tissue, fuse together. And also it's possible to co-culture other cell types like fat cells or collagen in the same system. And then the end product should be something like livestock meat, but we are not really yet reaching this kind of steak type of texture, but something like minced beef type of products. And so some landmarks of the cultured meat development. So the first pilot product, a beef burger, was presented to the media in 2013 by Mark Post from the University of Maastricht. But then in the end of last year, Singapore gave the regulatory approval to sell cultured meat as food, and now it's available in a restaurant in Singapore. But I would say that this is still not anything really big, because it's very small scale production, and there are still many development needs in the technology before it can be really scaled up to large scale production in many countries. And so there have been some work done for estimating the environmental impacts of cultured meat by me and also other groups. And what we know now is that the energy use requirement of cultured meat production are quite high. So these bars show the ranges, so this is the industrial energy, so electricity and other fuels that are used for the production, not including the feed energy that animals get from feed directly. But then if we look at the greenhouse gas emissions, then cultured meat is about at the same level with other meat substitutes, but it really depends on the energy source, if low emission energy sources are used, and also the nutrition medium, because there is still a lot of development going on about how we feed the cultured meat cells in a sustainable way. But one of the benefits of cultured meat could be that the land use requirements can be really low, also depending on how we feed the cells. And so then this could reduce the need for agricultural land and reduce deforestation, provide biodiversity benefits, and also reduce the losses of nitrogen and phosphorus to the waterways from agricultural fields. So in the previous figures, the environmental impacts were compared per unit of protein, but with some colleagues, we published a paper where we looked at the impacts of different novel foods per unit of different nutrients as well. So not only protein, and then of course what we should do is to look at the full diets, and that's what my research group is currently working on. And then I would like to introduce another interesting product from cellular agriculture, which is a microbial protein, which is a higher chain oxidizing bacteria. And the interesting thing with this product is that it doesn't require any agricultural land for producing the ingredients for the nutrition medium, because this bacteria can use CO2 as a carbon source, so it's pumped as a gas into the bioreactor, and it takes hydrogen from water molecule that is cut by using electrolysis process, and then it also requires some nitrogen and other nutrients. We just published a paper that came out recently about the environmental impacts of this microbial protein, and what we found was that the environmental impacts, especially when we use wind energy as a source for the energy in the process, the impacts are really low, and they are actually so low that you cannot see the bars here. So land use, greenhouse gas emissions, acidifying emissions, eutropifying emissions, and the water scarcity were really low. And also this microbial protein, it has very good amino acid content and good fats. So in that sense, it would be really interesting protein substitute for plant-based products. And this product could be available in commercial scale production in a couple of years if they just get the regulatory approval. And so the further research needs are really, and also all of these are what my research group is currently working on. So looking at these diet level environmental assessments, making sure that the diets include all the required nutrients. Then also looking at the alternative ways of producing livestock byproducts, because both these novel food production technologies, but also in plant-based diets, we would need to replace all the co-products from livestock production, like leather and pet food, and all the parts of cows, for example, are used somehow for different products. We would need to produce those in other ways. And also the impacts on land use change. So what we would do with all the land that would be released from agriculture, and what the impacts of that would be. And then also the capacity of sustainable energy production. If the energy consumption of food production increases, can we produce enough sustainable energy? And then conclusions. So this novel cell culturing based technologies can provide potential environmental benefits, but there are still major investments needed in the development of the technologies, especially cultured meat. And then really this energy issue, can we produce enough sustainable energy for all sectors, also when energy demand is increasing in other sectors too. And then would the consumers actually be willing to consume these kind of novel foods? That's a huge question. And then, of course, this regulatory approvals needs to happen. And thank you very much. And here's the picture before Corona time.
Those were the good old days, weren't they, Hannah? Thank you very much. That was an excellent talk. I, for one, would definitely eat these products, and I'm very excited about what the future looks like. But that was a fantastic talk. Thank you very much indeed. And we're going to our final talk before the first Q&A, and that is going to be from Brian Cook at the University of Oxford, who's going to help us understand a little bit about behavior change in this important area. Thank you very much, Brian.
Sorry, Alan, just one delay here. Oh, sorry, I'm gonna have to.
Is it me or have we lost Brian?
I think we lost him.
Okay, let's give him a moment to rejoin.
I was wondering, there was a question for Hannah regarding the previous presentation while we were waiting for Brian. Hannah, did you look at micronutrients besides macronutrients in these products?
Yeah, so for the cultured meat, we really don't have data. So what we did in that paper where we compared the environmental impacts per different nutrients, we just assumed that it would have the same nutritional content than beef, but it's of course a huge assumption. But then, yes, for the microbial protein, the company that is producing it has also the more detailed nutritional data.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks for that, Hannah. Okay, Brian, back to you.
All right, is that working now?
That's perfect. Thanks very much.
Right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. I'm Brian Cook. I'm a senior researcher at the University of Oxford, and I'm working on the Livestock Environment and People Project, which is a Wellcome Trust funded project where we're looking at all aspects of meat consumption, from health, environmental, social, and economic aspects of meat consumption. And I'm going to talk today a bit about our work looking at consumer behavior and some strategies we've been exploring around nudging people towards more sustainable purchasing. So we do know, we've heard from all the talk before about the environmental impact of animal food consumption. This analysis we did from the NDNS data here in the UK recently, looking at the trends in meat consumption. And you can see from these lines here that both red and processed meat have gone down a bit in the decade that we looked at, but white meat consumption has gone up to compensate for that. And overall, there was a small reduction in meat consumption in the UK. But it is far less than the recommendations we can hear about in terms of meat consumption reductions to meet the climate change goals. So there's still a need to be able to nudge people towards more sustainable diets. So we'll talk a bit about what we've been looking at in this area. So this is the dual processing theory of decision making. So we have the so-called system 1 and system 2 of how we make decisions throughout the day. So system 1 is a kind of unconscious and automatic way of making decisions that drives our habits throughout the day. When retailers talk about people sleep shopping, it's a lot of that system 1 approach. And then system 2, it's the more conscious and rational approach where we're taking in information and thinking about long-term goals and so on. So these system 1 and system 2 are always happening and interacting throughout the day, and neither one is superior to the other. But there's different strategies we can look at in terms of how to nudge people in different ways. So in terms of what works to reduce meat consumption, these are a few of the systematic reviews that we've done on our team, some looking at choice architecture interventions. And one at the bottom is one of 2 that we've done looking at sustainability labeling that I'll talk about a bit. So we look at educational and motivational interventions to shift consumer purchasing. Self-monitoring has been found in some studies to be quite effective. So when you're providing people with tools to monitor their own meat consumption and helping them in kind of a more programmatic way, that's found to be quite a lot of evidence that can be effective. Of course, how you scale that up is a different challenge. That graphic you see there of Optimize, that's a randomized control trial that we'll be launching later this month that will be working with people who have already expressed an interest in reducing meat consumption. And that will be an online platform that they can use for 9 weeks that will help them to actually nudge them towards being able to reduce their consumption. When we look at information and education, so providing people with information about the health or environmental consequences of meat consumption has been found generally in literature to be helpful only in shifting people's intention to reduce their meat consumption, but hasn't been very effectively found so far in helping people to actually change their behavior to reduce meat. So it hasn't been found to be terribly effective so far in the research in general. Social norms is another interesting area. So we know that we're very strongly influenced by what other people do. I always think of the McDonald's signs they used to have, the ultimate social norm nudge. A systematic review that we did at Oxford a while back did find there was good evidence that norms did influence people in either direction around healthy or unhealthy eating. But some critical things to think about when you're using social norm messages is you have to make sure that the reference group is meaningful to the audience you're trying to influence, that the message has to be salient and actually noticeable by the people in that context, and you have to avoid the reactants or the opposite reaction that sometimes people can react with if people feel that they're trying to be kind of overtly persuaded. So some examples there of some social norms. Of course, the other question with meat reduction is it's not really a norm yet. Most people still eat meat. So how do you do this with counter-normative so-called norms? So dynamic norms or denoting the process of change might be quite effective. So there's some interesting work done at Stanford. This is a paper they published a couple years ago where they looked at some trials that they did where you can see the nudge that they have on the top of the menu screen here of we've noticed customers are starting to choose more meatless dishes. In that experiment, or in a few of those experiments, they found a 1 to 2.5% increase in veggie meal consumption or veggie meal purchases. When they tried the very same thing in a more fine dining restaurant on a menu, they actually found the opposite, a 3.7% increase in meat consumption, in the meat purchases. And they theorized that perhaps it could be a different audience there that was not receptive to that message, or it could be that just that kind of context where if you're going out for a special meal, that you may be thinking this is the time to splurge and have a meat-based meal and not a veggie meal. We've done another experiment ourselves with a restaurant chain here in the UK, where we tested a version of that message you see on the bottom in green there on all their digital menu screens. And in that particular one, we didn't find an effect of that message on the plant-based meal purchases, though I would have to say that the fidelity of it wasn't very good. So there are a lot of challenges in working with the company in getting that to roll out effectively. So there's kind of differing evidence right now on what works in terms of social norms. Creative naming, we know there's some research showing that using more indulgent language around meat-free products can really work. This is some research from the Better Buying Lab they did with Sainsbury's cafes, where this is one example of by having more indulgent language of this sausage and mash meal, they saw quite a big increase in the purchasing of that meal. So some lessons around there is to focus on the provenance, the look, flavor, and the feel of the plant-based dishes, and avoid these kind of terms of meat-free, vegetarian, and so on. Unless you're trying to appeal to a specific vegan or vegetarian audience, they tend not to work very well with a general audience. And we'll be running some trials next month with about 22 worksite cafeterias on this as well. Portion size is also the good evidence that this can be an effective strategy to reduce meat consumption. If done correctly, it also shows that customers won't report a lower enjoyment of the meal, but you also need to be careful with the pricing of this and people not feeling that they're getting less value by having a smaller portion of meat on a plate. Availability, or this kind of choice editing, is maybe the most promising one to look at. So we've seen from both healthy eating and also some recent evidence around meat consumption that by adjusting the ratio of meat to meat-free in a category, you can actually get quite good results. So in Cambridge, they published some research in the canteen there, where they found anywhere from an 8 to a 15% increase in vegetable meal consumption after they adjusted the ratio of meat to meat-free meals. And here in Oxford, looking at a natural experiment in some of our cafeterias here, we found that when the service providers moved from a 2-to-1 meat to a 2-to-1 meat-free in their hot meals, we saw about a 25% reduction in meat purchases. So availability can be both a subtle and quite effective strategy here around nudging people. Then we're doing a lot of work around environmental impact labeling. So if we were able to provide customers with the environmental impact of specific products, that can be effective. We've done some work on our experimental online site. So we have a site where we can run all kinds of different manipulations to test what kind of strategies would work for online shopping. So it's fake food and fake money and so on, but does provide some evidence. This is our site. So this is one example of one label, which is kind of along the lines of the Nutri-Score, where you get an A to E score for the product with the traffic light colors as well. So we presented people with a variety of different scores in the products and asked them just to search for 10 different products just to shop for. This is another label that we looked at, kind of a globe one, where again, we have a score from A to E, with E being the highest impact, A being the lowest. And we have the colors as well. And another one here where we only put on the 20% worst products that were available. And we found all of these to be effective in the range of up to 10% reduction in the environmental impact. And we'll be doing some trials in some cafeterias starting next month as well. There's another one around positioning. In this particular one, we did with Sainsbury's, where we worked with them to reposition some of their meat-free products in their meat aisle. And we saw quite a good increase in meat-free product sales, but actually had no effect on meat sales. So a couple of last points here is we've seen a variety of things that I mentioned that could be effective in reducing meat consumption, but there's this tension around the kinds of strategies that may be more effective tend not to be seen as acceptable by either consumers or policymakers. So providing information, a lot of people think that's perfectly acceptable, like that idea, but tends not to be very effective. Where other things looking at restricting choices, taxation, eliminating choices, tend to be more effective, according to the research, but are not terribly acceptable. So that's an ongoing issue. And then the issue is working with industry to be able to come up with some high quality trials to gain more evidence. This is a challenge that we've had in working with them, where a lot of the companies may be reticent to work with us because they see not a lot of evidence, and so they can increase risk. Questions around sharing data, questions around legal agreements to develop these collaborations, where it's taken sometimes up to 2 years to work with these companies to get the agreements in place. Then you end up not having very many of these collaborations, not a lot of evidence, and the cycle continues. So last few points in terms of what kind of consumer behavior should we be looking at? Are we nudging the high meat eaters to lower impact options, or should we be looking at nudging everyone to more of a flexitarian approach? What are these better ways of collaborating with industry? We've had good luck with some, not so much good luck with others, and it's been rather haphazard. So how do we develop these more effective collaborations? And what kind of strategies can we use to increase the acceptability of these strategies for both consumers and policymakers to scale these interventions up? And then finally, the whole equity lens on behavioral interventions, which I haven't talked about here, but is a very important thing to look at in terms of the disadvantage that might be among some demographics for some of these behavioral interventions. So thank you. I'll leave it there.
Brilliant, Brian. Thanks very much. Covered some really important ground there, and actually brought us back to the beginning, which is really where Minna started to talk about transition. So I thought that was absolutely fantastic. Huge thank you to all the speakers. I thought that was a really excellent session. What we're going to do now is we're going to have about 10 minutes of questions, and you've posted a huge number of questions in the Q&A, so please do keep them coming. Happy for you to stop sharing when you're ready, Brian. So huge lot of questions, and I wondered if I could start, if all the speakers could turn their cameras on so that the lovely audience can see you all, that would be lovely. And I wonder, Minna, if I could start with you, because you gave a fantastic opening presentation about the need for transition and just transitions, and you presented 4 different types of transition. You talked about types of justice. You talked about distributive, recognitive, procedural, and restorative. And I wonder, it seemed to me that there might be some interesting tensions between those 4 buckets of justice. Some actions to ensure distributive justice may result in poor restorative justice, for example. And I'm wondering, I mean, you said that procedural justice was the most important because we need to get the policies in place, but there will obviously be some significant tensions in procedural justice when looking at the other sectors. I wonder if you could just talk about that for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, that's a very good point and a very important point. And another tension is really between sustainability and just, so to say, that it's not self-evident. And at the moment, in a political decision, actually this thinking and speaking in terms of just transition is often used as a barrier to transition, so to say, that please do consider this and that, and we should not harm anyone. And this has become more of the political use of the term, and I think it's not the right way of using it. And this is perhaps what the kind of these different dimensions of justice allow us to think about, that as a dynamic thing and something which is never perfect, something which is never ready, but it's always in the process. And it's kind of then there are these certain principles which we can take from the ethical reasoning, like for example for the recognitive justice, that we should really take care of the vulnerable ones, and not to make their position more precarious. And this is a good principle to kind of take along with us. And of course, someone suffers, but then it means that we need to think about the restorative measures, how we can take that into account. And there are plenty of them. And it's not only of monetary compensation, but it can be also about having these transition periods, for example, for farmers, because they have made their investments in the farms, and it will not. They are not able to change it over the night. It might be education, it might be this kind of a more long-term, more slow stuff. But thinking in these different dimensions allows us to, they allow to go for the different views. But of course there are tensions, and justice in itself is a very political term.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, it does remind me of last week, in last week's webinar, Howie Frumpkin spoke, and he gave his list of 6 things that we should be doing if we're doing research and work in this area. And one of those things, essential items, he said, was to focus on the most vulnerable. So this should not be the work of, rich people living in West London, where I live, but actually we really need to focus on the impacts of this on the most vulnerable people, both here, both in Europe, where the focus of this webinar, but globally as well. Right, Jana, do you have a question to ask our panel?
Yeah, there has been a question, maybe to all, but maybe perhaps Sarah can start answering to this. Do you take into account the amount of food transportation change in examining the environmental impacts of each food product? And how does that change how does that vary among different types of agricultural products?
And in our estimations, we are taking into account the full life cycle. For example, in the case of the carbon footprint, we are taking into account the carbon footprint associated to the production stage, the carbon footprint associated to the transportation, and finally the carbon footprint associated to the cooking. For example, the last stage, the cooking of the foodstuffs, is not always included in all in the studies that you can find in the literature concerning the carbon footprint of current consumption habits. In our case, we took that into account also because the Spanish diets recommend the consumption of low processed food. Because from an environmental perspective, the amount, for example, of energy, the amount of electricity that you need to prepare the food is lower. So you are, in this regard, you are reducing the greenhouse gases emission. So transportation is included in the estimations, but the contribution from the transportation, for example, to the carbon footprint is not so remarkable, maybe around 10% of the total carbon footprint. But mostly because of these recommended diets recommend the consumption of local products and national products. We don't want to say don't eat food from other countries, but we must promote the consumption of food that we have in our cities, in our places, in order to reduce for example, the greenhouse gases emissions associated to the distribution step.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that applies to every country.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and as Pauline pointed out, there are trade-offs there as well, aren't there? There are trade-offs with, we can talk about greenhouse gas emissions, but if you start growing more vegetables or whatever, what are the trade-offs for biodiversity or water use or the various issues? So I think there's that's lovely. All right, can I ask Hanna a question? There are two questions that come through. I'm going to put them together, Hanna. So the first question is really a bit more philosophical. Why on earth do we need lab cultured meat? Why don't we just tell people to eat less meat or convince people to eat less meat? And the second question is, well, now that we've made it in Singapore, do we know how it's going down? Are people eating it? Are people buying it? So if you could combine those two, that would be lovely.
Yeah, so the first question is actually excellent because I was supposed to tell that, of course, in the beginning, but I forgot. So the idea behind the cell-cultured foods is really to produce something that is similar to the foods that we are used to eating. So similar to animal-based food in the case of cultured meat and this cultured egg albumin and so then that it would be easier for consumers to switch to using them. And also maybe there could be some nutritional benefits like the nutritional content or digestibility, like legumes, everybody cannot eat them, for instance. So those kind of things. And then the question about the Singapore. So actually I was just trying to find the tweet because I just saw a tweet like a couple of days ago where there was a number how many people had tasted the Singapore cultured chicken nuggets, and it was something like that 99% of them would like to eat them again. But I guess there is also like that the people who have tasted it, they are probably like people who are very interested in these kind of novel foods. But at least it seems like that they like it. But okay, a chicken nugget, it's I guess it's quite easy to make tasty, like whichever material you use, even some plant-based substitutes could work very well.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I think we have time for at least one more question, and there is one for Brian. It goes like this. In India, before Green Revolution, people used to practice food production and consumption that can be counted today as sustainable. What can be the relevance of local and traditional knowledge today towards achieving sustainable food systems?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we certainly know that people who have an interest in growing their own food, cooking from scratch, and so on, are much more open to the environmental message and much more open to adopting these environmental behaviors. I'm kind of thinking of a trial that one of our PhD students, Filippo Bianchi, did during his degree, where he actually worked with people to provide them with free meat alternatives for 4 weeks to see what that happened to the meat consumption. And found that during that time, and even 4 weeks after, people had reduced their meat consumption. So there's this idea that if you can kind of hold people's hands a bit and get them to engage in environmental behaviors, whether it be cooking from scratch or learning how to eat meat alternatives, that you can change their behavior. And another interesting thing he found in there was that there was a marked increase in people's self-identity as a flexitarian. So regardless of how much they reduced their meat consumption, they shifted their identity. So there's this idea in behavioral sciences that if you can just get people to engage in that target behavior by any means possible, other than some way that they perceive as totally coercive, that they will begin to change their identity, and that could be a really powerful driver for them to pursue that behavior. So there could be something there of encouraging people to cook from scratch, eat whole foods, which we hear can help with the environmental impact. And if they do change their identity, that can help down the road with engaging that behavior.
And thanks, Brian. Just a quick question, I think, to Pauline. I mean, looking at your talk there, Pauline, it looked like the resilience of the UK food system is in question, given the amount of fruit and vegetables that are imported at the moment. Do you have any understanding of the situation in other European countries? Do we have any data on that, or do you know whether the resilience of those food systems equally likely to be stressed in the future?
Yeah, so the imports from climate vulnerable countries in Europe, and so we look at current climate vulnerability, and then we look at if we were to import like we did in the 1980s, what proportion would come from climate vulnerable countries. And it seems to be more stable. So European countries import more from other European countries, but of course, these vulnerability scores in countries and in production areas within countries are changing as well, where we see the impact of climate change, especially in Southern Europe, where quite a lot of these plant-based foods are produced. So that is not something static, but we see particularly in the UK that we have started to produce less and less ourselves here, whereas in Europe, that proportion, if you take the European Union as a whole, seems to be quite stable. But yeah, there's still shifts because of the impact of climate change, especially in the Southern European countries.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Pauline. Excellent. Right, that's the end of our first panel. And now we're going to have, I'm going to hand over to Janna, who's going to introduce the next speaker.
Yes, we're moving on.
Sorry, but please, you'll hear one talk and then one brief intervention, but please keep your questions coming in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, we're moving to the kind of policy section of this webinar, and our next speaker is Dora Sentpali-Claes. I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. She's a policy officer from the European Commission, Directorate General for Health and Food Safety, and she's going to tell us about the farm to fork strategy. Please go ahead, Dora.
Yes, thank you very much, Jana, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure for me being here today with you. Indeed, I work for the European Commission's Directorate General for Health and Food Safety in the unit which is responsible for the so-called farm to fork strategy, which is going to be also the subject of my presentation. I will share my screen. I'll turn off my video to ensure that my connection remains stable during my presentation, but after the presentation then I will turn on again the video. Okay, so screen share. Okay, so the farm to fork strategy. This is a strategy of the European Commission for a fair, healthy and environmentally friendly food system. And this strategy is in the heart of the so-called European Green Deal, which sets out how to make Europe the first climate neutral continent by 2050. This strategy has overall goals, I mean, 4 in approximately in total. This is how we can group those. So the climate footprint should be reduced, and then the next one is that we should lead the global transition towards competitive sustainable sustainability from farm to fork. Then we should also identify and tap in new opportunities, and we have to create a robust and resilient food system, which has been also mentioned earlier in the interventions. So more concrete, the farm to fork strategy has put forward a number of goals. These are more in detail than when referring to my previous slide, is when it comes to the positive environmental impact of the food production. Then we have to look in preserving and restoring the land and the sea-based resources. We have to mitigate climate change and adapt to its impacts, and reserving the loss of biodiversity is also key. Furthermore, we have to ensure food security and public health. So making sure that everyone has access to sufficient, nutritious and sustainable food is in the heart of the farm to fork strategy. We have to ensure high standards of safety and quality, plant health, animal health and welfare. It's a very important point that while we talk about sustainability, it has to happen without compromising on food safety. Furthermore, we have to preserve the affordability of the food and generating further income and returns, fostering the competitiveness of the sector, just mentioning some examples, safeguarding occupational health and safety, and ensuring the integrity of the single market in the European Union. The Farm to Fork strategy sets also or puts forward a couple of targets for sustainable food production. These are 4 quantitative targets, what we have, to reduce by 50% the overuse and risk of chemical pesticides and reduce by 20% of more hazardous pesticides. So this is the first group. Then we have the second group to reduce nutrient losses by at least 50% by ensuring no deterioration in soil fertility. This will reduce use of fertilizer by at least 20%, then reduce sales of antimicrobials for farmed animals and in aquaculture by 50%, and achieve at least 25% of the EU's agricultural land under organic farming and a significant increase in organic aquaculture. What is important to say that these are aspirational targets, so it is not set in law, if I can say this very simple, but these are ambitious, and this is what the European Commission is going to work towards. Of course, when we talk about food system, this is a very, as it was also mentioned, it's a very complex system. So the big question is how we reach the goals and the concrete targets, which I was mentioning earlier. It is clear that the Commission cannot do this alone. And there are many goals and many actors in the food system, and of course also many ideas. So in a way, there is no easy way, no silver bullet to make the European food system sustainable. But of course, the European policies such as regulation are very important, but we need also the different actors on the board. And these actors in the food chain, such as farmers or fishers and agriculture producers, but all other players. So we move beyond the classical food supply or food value chain approach, what we have now in the so-called general general framework of the law regulation, general food law, as we call it in the European Union, which is strictly focusing on primary producers, distribution, and consumers. So we move beyond this, and we have to look how the different actors interact with each other. And what we need to do, we have to put in place multiple policy instruments, so legislations, regulations, but as it was also said before, it's very important to look in the education, research, and innovation as well. So what are the concrete actions which are in this Farm to Fork strategy, which has basically 27 concrete actions in its annex in this so-called action plan? So we have, first of all, the legislative framework for a sustainable food system, which is going to be one of the flagship initiatives of the European Commission. And this has to be adopted by 2023, which will be a framework legislation with a comprehensive set of general principles and requirements. It will ensure policy coherence at EU and national level. It will have provisions on governance, collective involvement of stakeholders. The work is going to be complicated and very challenging, but we believe that if this framework legislation is in place and if it has the right principles, requirements, responsibilities put in place for the different actors, this can be basically a driver from the legislative point of view. And then we have the other flagship initiative, which is the development of a contingency plan for ensuring food supply and security in times of crisis. Obviously, this is something which was, the cause was the current pandemic situation, and this is why it was decided to put in place also such a contingency plan. Then we also have other actions which should ensure sustainable food production. So it is basically, we are moving now in this area of the primary production sector. One of them is the new Common Agricultural Policy, which will play a major role in delivering the objectives and the targets of the Farm to Fork strategy. It will mainly be organized via national strategic plans, in which member states have to indicate how the various instruments of this Common Agricultural Policy will contribute to the objectives of the Common Agricultural Policy and also to the Farm to Fork strategy. And then in this context, moving forward, there will be also other specific actions, as for example, the revision of the Sustainable Use of Pesticides Directive, then the revision of regulation to facilitate plant protection products containing biological active substances. Then we will have an action plan for organic sectors to stimulate supply and demand for organic products. And we will also have an action plan for integrated nutrient management to reduce the pollution from fertilizers. So as you can see already in this area, we have quite a couple of things to do, and also in the furthermore, I will explain even more about what to do in this sustainable food production stage. And of course, different services of the Commission are working on these sector-specific approaches. Furthermore, we will also propose the revision of the existing animal welfare legislation, which is a very important aspect too, and we hear a lot about this currently. And we will have the revision of the feed additives regulation. There will be legislative initiatives to enhance cooperation of primary producers. Then more horizontal level, there will be clarifications of the scope of the competition rules as regard to sustainability and collective actions. And also on data. Data is very important. There will be a proposal for a farm sustainability data network in the future. Now, moving to this more sectoral aspect of sustainable fisheries and aquaculture. Also in this context, the common fishery policies will be very important. The Maritime and Fishery Fund will spend also more than €1 billion to support sustainable seafood. And there will be the EU strategy on algae and fight against food fraud through an enhanced traceability system, just mentioning some examples from this very specific area. And now in the next stage, in this stage of the manufacturing or processing industry and retailer, hospitality and food services, the Commission has also a couple of actions which is going to be implemented. So there will be an initiative to improve corporate governance. What does it mean? So the Commission is looking in it how sustainability can be, the sustainability aspect and approach can be integrated in the so-called director's duties and in the due diligence approach. Furthermore, there will be an EU code and monitoring framework for responsible business and marketing conduct in the food supply chain, a very important initiative of the Commission already to be delivered middle of or this year. Yes, in the middle of this year. Why is it very important? Because this is a voluntary code, as it is a code of conduct, but because of legislative initiatives take a lot of time to be implemented and to be adopted, the Commission has decided to accelerate the process of the transition with voluntary initiative like this code. And in this context, the Commission will seek voluntary commitments from food companies and organizations to take concrete actions on health and sustainability, focusing in particular reformulating food products in line with guidelines and reducing environmental footprint. And then, I mean, we will have also a couple of initiatives of help to shift towards healthy and sustainable diets, minimum mandatory criteria for sustainable food production, revision of the EU promotion programs, and we will have also sustainable labeling framework. And I come now to the next slide, a very important issue, which has been also raised now a couple of times, food loss and waste. This is something which is very horizontal. So this is not a lot of legislation in place in this particular legislation in place. This is something which has to be integrated in all different policy areas. And research and innovation, investment, skills and data going to be also very important, because of course we have to have tools which enable the transition. And then the last slide of my presentation is basically promoting the global transition. It is important for the European Union that we are going to be one of the key actors who are driving this transition, and we will do it through, obviously, through trade agreements, also green partnerships we are going to establish or put in place, and we will also promote the transition to a sustainable, fair, healthy and environmentally friendly food system through international standards setting different international forums. This is if the 27 actions the European Commission is trying to put in place for the next 3-4 years, not longer. And yes, I'm happy to reply to any questions if there are. Thank you very much.
That was super, Dora. Thank you very much. I think you're going to be very busy. I've always thought I had a busy agenda, but that is a huge amount of work to do. Very exciting. So I'm sure there'll be tons of questions on that. I've got a whole armful of questions I'd love to ask you, but thank you very much for that presentation. That was fantastic. So before we have the final panel, it's a great honor to introduce Anna Lati from the University of Ghana. Anna, as I mentioned earlier, was the former Director of Nutrition at the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, has now returned to her home country and to spend some time in Ghana. I'm sure she's delighted to be back. And so Anna, I know that the FAO was particularly involved in quite a lot of work on sustainability, and of course, later on this year, we're hoping to see a really exciting UN Food Systems Summit, which will feature sustainability very heavily. So I wonder if you could give us some of your thoughts on what needs to be done and where the opportunities are on this important topic of environmental sustainable food systems.
Okay, thank you very much, Ellen and your team, for inviting me to make contribution to this very exciting webinar. Indeed, until December 2020, I was the Director of Nutrition at FAO, and I'm currently will be joining the University of Ghana as a Professor of Nutrition. It is a pleasure to be here. Now, I'd like to make 3 points to start my contribution. The first point I want to make is that our food systems are not moving in the right direction. And I think most of the presentations that have been made attest to this. We are growing a lot of food, and yet we still have people who are hungry. Our food systems are not delivering unhealthy diets. Our food systems are not equitable, and they are not sustainable. There are problems with our food systems. That's the first one. The second one is that there is a global call to transform our food systems to make them better. Okay, and a lot of reports have come out on this. The third point I want to make is that food systems and planetary health are linked, and they must be addressed together in any food systems transformation that we talk about. We cannot afford to work in silos anymore. We should work, systems thinking means bringing the pieces together to address them in a systematic way. I think currently the two major challenges facing us now are malnutrition in all its forms. It's increasing in every region of the world. And the second is that we are degrading our environment, and we are actually not using our natural resources wisely. So these have become major problems, and they are getting worse. Okay, and this, we really need to address this. Now, what are the global opportunities for us to fall on to do these changes that we want to make in the food systems? First, I'll say that the time or the environment is so conducive for us to make these changes. We have the UN Food Systems Summit, which is coming on this year. This is a huge opportunity to lay the foundation to change the food systems the way we want it to go. The Food Systems Summit is supposed to come up with what they call game changers. These are game changers, that means actions that will change the foundations of our food systems. We also have the UN Decade of Action on Nutrition, which started in 2016 and will end in 2025. We are going through the midterm review of this Decade of Action, and food systems transformation is going to be one of the key things that will be driven in this midterm review. We also have the Nutrition for Growth Summit, which will happen in Japan. This is a commitment summit where countries will come and make commitments. And we're hoping that countries will actually make commitments along the lines of food systems that will change their food systems as they have it in their countries. Now, we have these global opportunities. What are the policy challenges? We have a number of challenges that will actually be a block if we don't take action on these things. The first challenge, which I have seen working in the UN, is that we need to look at our definition of healthy diets. You know, definition of healthy diet should go beyond just nutrients. We should see how we to put sustainability, culture, and environmental considerations into our definition of sustainable diet or healthy diets. At the moment, the Committee on World Food Security, CFS, is developing a voluntary guidelines on food systems for nutrition or for nutrition. And I can tell you that the term healthy diet, when you put it to sustainability, has become a very contagious issue. They don't want to hear sustainable healthy diet or healthy and sustainable diet. It's actually holding back the negotiations. And countries are fighting to take sustainability out of the definition of healthy diets. I think we have such a big opportunity, and this is going on. This is a big problem. You know, we cannot just restrict healthy diets without putting in sustainability. This is the opportunity, and we should take it and make the bold decisions. The second challenge is our food price policies. If you look at a lot of countries, the agricultural policies, the investment policies are heavily skewed towards stable food production. Over the decades, we see that staple food prices, especially cereals, are actually remaining stable or decreasing. If you look at the nutritious foods, fruits and vegetables, animal source foods, their production and prices are going high. In fact, since getting back to Ghana, I've been looking at the prices of fruits and vegetables. This year is supposed to be the International Year of Fruits and Vegetables. Can you imagine a small, medium-sized watermelon costing $3? $3. How can a poor household consume watermelon, the fruits we want them to consume? So there are problems with our food prices. You know, we really need to look at the nutritious food. The next is we should pay attention to the small scale farmers. The small scale farmers, the analysis that have been done by others, for example, Severo et al., say that about 57 to 80% of the nutritious foods that we produce come from small scale farmers. But sadly, they are actually the ones that are hit by poverty. They produce the nutritious foods and they don't get a fair income. They are not linked well to markets. You know, the foods they produce are so perishable. So they face serious problems. So we really need to look at those who are producing these nutritious foods for us. Then we have to engage businesses. You know, engaging businesses in our food system transformation is absolutely necessary. Businesses actually control all aspects of the food systems. They control it. We cannot make the food system transformation we are talking about and leave them out. If they are doing the wrong thing, let's have governments put in place the policies, the laws, the regulations that will force businesses to do the right thing so that they can get the food system transformation we want. We have also talked about, innovations. One was talking about the clean meat and all. Businesses are the ones who will bring this kind of innovation in our food systems transformation. So we need them. Finally, this actually goes for the team, research and evidence generation, very critical for food systems transformation. We need the evidence on what works, but we need to package the evidence in a form that policymakers can take action on. One problem with researchers is that we do the work, we publish it, and we don't get it to the policymakers. How do we get policymakers to take this evidence and put them into action? They need researchers to package it in this form. Otherwise, we will not get far with all the wonderful research that we are doing. And finally, I cannot stop this by not talking about COVID-19. COVID has taught us a lot. It has forced us to rethink our food systems, to make our food systems resilient, because those who were most affected were the poor and vulnerable. COVID is telling us that we are not taking care of the poor and vulnerable properly. We are not. And so we really need to think about food systems transformation that is fair and equitable to the poor and vulnerable. We need to make it resilient. We need to make it, protect the poor by putting in social protection measures so that come any pandemic, we are ready. We are ready to make sure that our food system is resilient. So I'll say that we have the opportunity. This is the opportunity. The global opportunity is there. We need to take bold decisions. We need to act decisively, and we need to use the evidence to support the policymakers so that they can get the food systems that is working. We need a food system transformation that will change our way of eating and our way of thinking. I thank you very much for this opportunity, Alan, and to your group for the wonderful work you're doing. Thank you very much.
Absolutely brilliant, Anna. Thank you so much for that really inspirational intervention. Thank you very much indeed. Absolutely brilliant. Now, I'm sure that all panel members, and if we can keep all cameras on from the speakers now, please. I'm sure all panel members would like to ask Anna a question or respond to Anna as well. But there's also been a huge number of questions for you, Dora. You're quite popular. And I wonder whether you would like to address any of the questions. There are questions on how can we follow the Farm to Fork strategy implementation? Is there a platform? How is it going to interact with the with the CAP reforms rather? Is there going to be interaction? I would like to ask a question. You ask a lot of what you spoke about was significant transformations to farming systems in Europe. How will you be supporting farmers? How will the European Commission support farmers to make those substantial transformations to the way they farm and everything? But you can see there's a lot of questions there. I'm more than happy for you to pick out a couple that you particularly want to answer. And then before you do, let me just say what I'm going to do next, if it's all right, Jan. What I thought we could do was ask each of the speakers who've presented today, very kindly presented, to think about what they've heard today in the last 2 hours, and also what Anna has just said, and ask them to reflect what have they learned, and how is this, what's the key thing they're going to take away from this webinar. That would be fantastic. So Dora, if I could turn to you first, and then we'll go around all the speakers in turn.
Yes, so indeed, maybe I start with your last question, Alan. So how the CAP will support, or how the farmers will be supported. I mean, it will be one of the main instruments is going to be the CAP, which basically allocated currently 291.1 billion euros. And out of this, 270 will be direct payments for farmers. And then there will be also rural development. We also have a EU Invest Fund, which takes in particular also SMEs into account. So there is a lot of money dedicated. And of course, we have also a couple of research and innovation programs, Horizon Europe, Horizon 2020, which I'm sure that all of you are familiar with this. So these are basically the enablers and the tools what we are going to use. With respect of where you can follow the Farm to Fork, the implementation of the Farm to Fork strategy, there is, the Commission has a website. So if you just very simply search for Farm to Fork Strategy European Commission, you will arrive at that website, and there are different sections which then also direct you to the sector-specific initiatives as such. And then maybe I also question about the process of the legislation on this framework legislation on sustainable food system. We have very clear rules how we have to make legislation. So there will be a public consultation of the public on the website of the European Commission, where everybody, different kind of stakeholders, but it is absolutely public, can provide input on a so-called roadmap. This roadmap identifies already the main aspects, what we would like to put forward and what we identify that should be part of this legislation. And this is on the so-called Better Regulation portal of the European Commission. And throughout the process, then there are also various consultations. So I can say the entire process is very transparent, and in this case of this framework legislation, we even want to ensure that we have as many discussions as possible, because this is really something what is the key and the key aspect or the key element of the Farm to Fork legislation, Farm to Fork strategy. So this is it. I don't know what.
No, that's perfect, Dora. Thank you very much. That was a really helpful set of responses. Thanks very much. All right, we've got 5 minutes left. I'd like to ask each of you for 1 minute in the order that you spoke earlier, and then we can sign it off. So Minna, I wonder if I could come to you first. What are you going to take away from this webinar?
I will take away Anna's inspirational, motivational speech, meaning that we need to remember the so-called big picture while we are doing the small nitty stuff, in a way to not to forget it.
Fantastic. I think that's absolutely right. Brilliant. Lovely. Thanks, Minna. I think next was Sarah.
Yes, I would like to say two things. The first one is related with the questions that I have. That is that the Spanish recommendations are more reliant on plant-based foodstuffs, although meat is promoted, but in low amounts. The main basis are plants. And secondly, and in line with the presentation from Pauline, the effect on the results, on the environmental results from the origin of the foodstuffs that we consume. For that reason, it's important to take into account the origin and the background activities involved in the production, because the consumption of water resources and the emission of greenhouse gases emission could be totally different between countries.
Excellent, lovely. Thanks, Sarah. Okay, Pauline.
Yeah, thank you. I learned a lot, and probably too much to summarize in 10 seconds. But I think mostly I'm very reassured by Anna's inspirational speech, but also by Hannah's really technological solutions and innovative ideas, and also the other speakers, of course, that we have the tools, we have the knowledge to change the food systems transformationally. And I think we really are now at a point where we need to see what works through the type of research that Brian is doing, looking at how people have found their ways to different diets, especially in the global north, and learn from that to inspire others.
That's brilliant, Pauline. Thanks very much. Hanna.
Yes, so what I would like to say is that I don't want to say that we should go only for these novel technologies, but it should be something. Actually, we have a research project where we are looking at how we could combine this kind of agroecological farming practices and farming systems, sustainable energy production at the farm, and also production of these cell-cultured foods at the farm. So it doesn't need to be large corporations, but also farmers could produce these things. And so then we could have these sustainable farming practices for the crop production and producing the ingredients for these cell cultured foods, but still have also these high technologies.
Brilliant, great, fantastic. And Brian?
Yeah, this has kind of been really useful for me. Always amazing to be able to hear from researchers in different areas that are well beyond my area of expertise, talking about the great depth of research that they're doing around alternative proteins or the state of the UK food system or policy and so on. So it's always kind of energizing for me to hear these kinds of research insights. And I guess it would just be my kind of pitch to, you know, often it feels like when we're dealing with behavioral sciences, we're doing very small kind of nudges. But I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from that area in psychology broadly of how we can kind of take all the amazing research you're doing and connect it in a way that will really be heard by the audiences that need to hear it, whether it be consumers or policymakers. So just something I'd love people to think about, and certainly happy for you to contact me or others and just realize how we can use these lessons for make things happen.
Fantastic. I mean, we've run out of time. I think it's been a hugely, I mean, it's been a really brilliant session. I really enjoyed it. I hope our audience, which peaked at about 140 today, really enjoyed it as well. It's been a real privilege to have all of you on the panel today. I think, you know, one thing that I have tried to do, one thing I've learned this evening is that it's wonderful to have Anna Lati back at the University of Ghana, where she can speak her mind freely, and my gosh, what a mind. So I think that's really exciting. But the other thing is that I would love it if all researchers listening to this call took Anna's last point on board particularly. It is not good enough, and there is not enough time for us to be writing papers in boring journals that nobody reads, okay? We must be writing, producing papers, doing analysis which goes to policymakers in a format which they can understand. And I think that is our job. We must speak to the right people. We must be presenting our data in the right sorts of ways so that we can actually lead, we can have these transformations that we've all been talking about. We know we must do it, and it's just not happening fast enough. So I think if we can all listen to Anna's last plea, then I think we will be in a better place. I'm going to close this meeting, Jana, unless you have anything you'd like to say.
Yeah, I think the dialogue between research and policymakers is important. Even the researchers can ask policymakers, what do they need?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Fantastic. So I'd like to thank you all, especially a huge thank you to Dora as well from the European Commission for joining us today. Thank you very much. Wonderful to have fantastic speakers. Thank you again to Anna Lati. Thank you to all the team who put this together, particularly to Ariadna, who's the brains behind the scene, and Maria Carmen, and fantastic. Thank you all for coming. The next webinar is on Wednesday, March the 10th. It's on energy decarbonization, health and equity. I really hope you'll all come. Please do sign up on the website. I think that's it from us today. Thank you very much for joining, and hope to see you all again. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.